Hey everyone, James here from TDB, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today is going to be a drinking episode. I am going to be having a very iconic tea, perhaps the most famous recipe of all time, the 7542. And it's actually a tea that I have not brought on as sort of like a reference tea yet. I'm sure I've drinking this recipe a number of times on the show, probably with Denny as well as kind of on my own, but it's been a while, and it's also a tea recipe I'm not having very regularly at all, and that's not because I dislike it or anything like that. There's a lot of reasons for it, and I think I'll talk about those as I go. But this is 2005 7542, and I think it's interesting in a lot of different ways, and it's a session that I originally had blind from kind of one of those Teas We Like sessions. So thank you to those guys over there. They do great work on their site in terms of offering lots of interesting different selections, and I've had kind of the good luck and good privilege to try a number of teas through them, and this is one of them. And I originally had it blind, and it eventually got unblinded. And this is one of those teas, and I feel like there are certain teas when I'm doing these blind tastings that I'm like very consistently, I'm going to gravitate towards it, I'm going to like it. And then there's certain recipes that I think I'm also tend to be like, okay, I'm very consistent. 7542 is one, especially when I'm having it blind, where depending on kind of my mood and how I'm brewing it, is my stomach full or something like that, I feel like I can vary a lot more. And I think part of that is because it's a recipe that I really do think, personally for myself, but just generally, does benefit a lot from aging. This is strong, punchy tea. It's stronger than 8582, a Menghai tea factory recipe that I drink more often. And it's very much built, at least kind of in the classical sense, to age. So it's one that really does benefit a lot from mellowing out. And I think even something like 10 to 15 years it's not really enough. I mean, it's enough to kind of like see where the tea is going and kind of turn that corner. But if you're to kind of accidentally overbrew it, it's not a particularly forgiving tea there. And you can definitely end up with kind of a variability in sessions. Whereas something like an Iwu tea, I think, for me at least, it's very much kind of up my own personal preferences. Once it's young, and then once it's kind of in that semi-aged range, so 7+ years, then I in general just am going to like that tea very consistently. Whereas 7542, it's a little bit of a different beast when you know that what you're drinking, and you can kind of think about it, and you should be like, okay, I'm going to have this tea on a full stomach. This is a strong tea. You can choose what day you're going to put it, as opposed to when you're having sample C or whatever, and you're just like not totally sure what you're going to get there. So I am doing steep number 2 here, and I'm going to keep talking a bit about 7542. So this comes in 2005, really interesting time period, because it's kind of between those eras. This is one of those periods where you go back 2 years to 2003, and those 7542s in that 2001, 2002, 2003 range are way more expensive than this tea. And then you go forward, let's say to 2010 or something like that, a year which I actually do own. I think I own a tong of 7542. I guess that's the point that I am. I'm like, I think I own a tong of that, where the tea just gets significantly less expensive, like 3 or 4 times less expensive than this tea. So it really is between those lines, and it's it's like 2003 way more expensive, 2010 way less expensive, and so this one's kind of coming in the middle. And it's also the 504 batch. This is particularly important, I think, for the 2005 year. I was just taking a peek at Donghe Tea, which is kind of a good place to get sort of like very basic price references. And this tea, I should say 501 of this year, goes for several times more than 502 does. So there's a lot of different dynamics there. I'm sure some of it is based off of what is perceived to be good. I haven't done that side-by-side, 501 versus 502, but I do know that there is a fair contingent of poor fans that do swear by the 501, that is kind of the really good one there. And so I guess the final reason why this is not like these are not teas that I tend to gravitate towards normally, especially when you get into the scarcer areas, so like 2000, certainly pre-2004, these teas are just very expensive. This is a very sought-after recipe. It's famous for a number of reasons. It's an extremely iconic one, and so as a result, it is something that, generally speaking, if you get like an older, scarcer one, the price tag is just going to be very high. And as I said, this tea does take some time. So in order to get something very drinkable and ready to drink, by my standards, so let's say 20 years, the price tag is just very, very high. So as a result, I'm drinking stuff like 8582 or when Shagwan 8653, probably a fair bit more often than 7542. Even though I probably prefer 7542 to 8653, just because I'm generally Dayi over Shagwan person, I think 8653 it kind of tends to hit a little bit better value for myself. So, that's a lot of stuff just kind of on the recipe. So let's dig into the tea a bit. It's been a long time since I had this tea, so this is a little bit of a, I don't have strong memories of it. So definitely kind of a woody nose. I talked a lot, so definitely going to have to reboil that water. I had steep number 1 just before hitting record. As it tends to do, steep 2 was definitely a fair bit darker. My assumption with most of these samples is that they are coming from Taiwan, and so they're probably predominantly Taiwan storage. I don't know that for a fact for these, but this one certainly seems to fit the case. And it's hitting a point where there's definitely still some punchy bitterness to it. It has a very nice body, but it's definitely softened up a fair amount. In fact, I would probably describe the body more as like not terribly sharp and more kind of soft and full as a whole. And brew that there. So keeping them pretty short still. This is kind of one of those where you want to tip your toes into the water a little bit before you go all out and give it like the 4-minute blast. A little bit of sour, hints at some fruits. I mean, I'd say predominantly woody. I think the 8582 is an interesting kind of contrast to this. Personally, I'm a pretty big fan of the 8582 enough that I'd probably say I prefer it on average versus 7542, but that has like a little bit of a bigger body and less punchiness overall, I'd say. They also both have pretty strong wood characteristics. I think you're more likely to see kind of these sweet fruit characteristics develop into something like the 7542 rather than the 8582. This is me just kind of giving my basic approximations. If you guys have experiences with the recipes, please post how you like them, and also which ones you've had, because as I'm talking about, there is a big difference when it comes to looking at the 2000 7542. There was a whole lot of change in the pour industry. So 2000 7542 versus 2009 7542 technically from the same decade. They might as well be come from different stratospheres in terms of price and what they cost. Fairly generic aroma there. I'm using about 5.6 grams in a 95 milliliter Ishin. And certainly not very sweet at all. And I could very much see why I would not necessarily want to love this tea in a blind tasting. It's one of those teas where you do really have to watch the aftertaste. The first steep was a little sweet, but that has really evaporated as I've kind of brewed on. Certainly a tea that I think would benefit from another 5-10 years easily of aging, if not more. And yeah, it's just a very slow moving one as far as age. It's like something like a 8582, I think, that's had probably the exact same storage as this at 18 years. I think I'd be much more inclined to drink fairly often when put in comparison with something like this. So good body, definitely kind of sharpening up, definitely getting a bit of minerals and resin to this as well. Kind of a salivating effect too. Yeah, and it's just a very, very burly tea in a way that I would not describe 8582. So really interesting contrast versus both 8582 and 8653 from the other big factory. I'm going to do steep number 4 right here. To tell this is a tea that's going to be going for quite some time. Aftertaste wise, the sweetness does come. One thing that's nice about kind of Menghai area teas is the sweetness tends to come relatively quickly. It's not something you really have to wait long for. You can even just kind of sit with it and wait for maybe 2 minutes and just see what your mouth is tasting, and what originally kind of comes across as a little bit more drying or bitter will kind of transform into kind of really nice sweetness. Definitely some astringent sensation. I would not say this is terribly drying, so I think it has certainly turned a corner. But even compared to something like the Love Forever paper tongue that I had fairly recently on the show, I would say that tea is a little bit closer to kind of hitting the point where I would, that tea has obviously all crossed that point of something I would drink regularly. I don't think this is quite there yet. I think this probably, in my estimation, still needs some time. A tea I could enjoy if someone likes a particularly strong tea and wants something. As I've said in the past, I do have a friend that really likes bitter tea. And so I think this tea would probably be okay there. I'd probably brew it even a little harder than what I'm doing right now. But certainly not a tea for those that are really into oolong drinking and are very averse to the bitter flavors. So for instance, my wife, who drinks a lot of red pu'er and oolongs, probably would not serve her this tea. Yeah, it doesn't ever quite get to that pill-like bitterness that, in my view, is kind of like one of the very top levels of bitterness. But you can just tell that this tea, well aged, and you can taste the age characteristics, is an ass kicker. And probably in 2005 or 2006, if you had this tea fresh, it would be very, very strong. And I think it'd be very, very difficult to drink that tea when young. Easy one to see why this would be a popular recipe to age. Yeah, and I'd say it's been pretty consistent, steep in, steep out. I'd say just the intensity tends to build or decline depending on how it's brewed each time. So yeah, definitely one that I will probably be enjoying for the rest of the day. I made sure to eat food before this, and I am personally glad I did, because yeah, this is still very, very strong tea. So yeah, there you have it, the 504-7542. I'm going to be bringing on a couple even older 7542s in the next few episodes. So really looking forward to that, just to have kind of the opportunity to try those teas. And I think they should be kind of an interesting contrast with this episode, where I am drinking the 2005 version. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Let me know if you've done that 501 versus 504 comparison. The 501 I think is a pretty absurd price at this point, so I'd certainly be curious to hear about anyone's particular impressions on that tea. Thank you all for tuning in. I will see you all next time. Cheers.